Beyond the Booth Live is back. Every Thursday, 4 p.m., we are here for you on Facebook, taking your questions, telling some stories. Gary, Keith, Ron, and myself, Steve Gelbs, happy to be with you once again. Gary, how's your Wi-Fi working right now?
No, it's a little spotty, but we'll try and hang in there.
All right. And the audio, we're going to project. If there's one person that can project, it's Gary Cohen. So we don't worry too much about that.
Something exciting's happening, Steve, as opposed to just, talking to you.
Talking to me. Yeah, exactly. 100%. Something as exciting, perhaps, as finishing a 2,000-piece puzzle. Keith, for those that don't follow on Twitter, why don't you fill everybody in on the progress?
I finished it, and it took me around just about a month. And in the very end, there was one piece missing. So I was upset about that, but that's the way it goes. I finished it, and I'm happy. I'm starting a new one now.
Do you think that one piece was a victim of Haji?
I think it was probably a victim of the vacuum cleaner, and with all the dog hair from the dog, I'm not going to dig my fingers into that.
All right, so we have a completed 1,999-piece puzzle. Let's put it that way. You also tweeted out that you've been watching Better Call Saul, which is a fantastic show. Yes. I know you love it, but we're going to get now everybody else's thoughts on what they've been watching. So you've been watching Better Call Saul. Ron, anything you've been catching up on during the quarantine?
I have become an Ozark fan. So I am locked into Ozark. That's been great. I think Jason Bateman, he's great in everything, whether it's a comedy or a dramatic role. I love watching him. Laura Linney, of course. And then I've been watching a lot of cooking shows because, I don't know, like you guys, I'm cooking every night or trying to cook every night. And I'm watching those flip shows, those HGTV kind of flip the house show.
Anything really impressive that you've picked up from the cooking shows that you've been able to put on the table?
You know what? It's interesting how much ego you need to be able to be a chef in the United States.
Gary, what about you?
No cooking shows, although I have been doing more cooking than I've ever done in my life, which is kind of odd for me. TV-wise, I've been watching, catching up on Community, which I'd never watched before. I don't know if any of you watched that. It's kind of fun, diverting. I watched a short series called Unorthodox, which is a fascinating little story about a woman who breaks free from an Orthodox community in Brooklyn. And something called Everything is Gonna Be Okay, which is terrific. Again, it's a relatively short series, but it's a great character study, really, really well done. So those are the things that I've been watching. I tried to get into Ozark. I couldn't quite get there. I watched all of Tiger King.
Oh,
it was very, very disturbing, but
I watched one episode, Gary, and that was it. I was done with that.
Yeah, when they about as much as you needed to.
Yeah, when they had the cat in the van and it was 105 degrees, I turned it off then. But good to hear, Gary. Unorthodox is next for me.
Yeah, Unorthodox was phenomenal. And Gary, I don't know if you did this. If not, go back. And Ron, if you're going to start this, you should know this too. After the last episode, it's only a 4-part series, but if you watch all the way through the credits, a secret 20-minute behind the scenes look comes up for you. So I don't know, Gary, did you watch that?
I did. And also what it led me to was another series, which is actually an Israeli TV series called Shtisel. And the lead actress in Unorthodox is also in that. And there are a couple of seasons of that, and I'm working my way through that. Similar kind of a story, but interesting if you need another jumping off point from that.
Great.
Interesting. I myself am in the middle of Peaky Blinders right now.
Peaky Blinders.
Okay.
Have you seen it, Ron?
No.
Have any of you guys watched it?
No.
Oh my gosh.
It's all Netflix.
My series of choice was Fleabag. Did you watch that?
Yes.
I did not.
Oh, the best.
Unbelievable. Phoebe Waller-Bridge is just phenomenally talented.
Fleabag, Amazon, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and Peaky Blinders, Keith, yes, that is Netflix. Okay, let's get to a fan question right off the top, because the only complaint over the first few weeks of this, and it's my fault, nothing you guys did, is that I keep asking for fan questions, and then we get so deep in conversation that by the time it comes time for fan questions, we say it's time to go. So we're going to start with a fan question now. This is from Alonzo, who's asked, I believe he asked this 2 times in a row, wants to know, will the hot foot ever make a comeback? And for Keith and Ron, what are your favorite pranks that you were a part of in your playing days? And maybe Gary, the favorite prank you've witnessed in all your years in baseball. Let's start with you, Ron. What's your favorite prank?
My favorite prank is an oldie but goodie. It's appeared in every clubhouse since the beginning of time. It's called the 3-man lift. The 2 guys that are on with me know what this is. And what they do is you get 2 guys to kind of hold the guy down, and one guy says he's going to lift all 3 of them. So, it goes back and forth. There's no way you can do it. Yes, you can do it. There's no way you can do it. Finally, the person, the victim, ends up getting between the 2 guys who lock him in, and the entire clubhouse pours everything on him, from whipped cream to mustard to ketchup. But it's once a year, every year in some clubhouse.
Keith, what about you?
Well, Ron will remember this. Every rookie that walked through Riverfront Stadium, the clubby there had a cage that had a big furry tail coming out like a wild animal, and you'd get the rookie to come over. Willie McGee about jumped out of his skin. Was it played on you, Ron?
Yeah, no, I never got that, but I know it.
Anyway, you get him over and you go, come on, he's friendly, and you get real close to the cage, and then he has a little lever he presses on the cage, and it flips the tail into the guy's face. And of course, it's just a tail, and you should see the reactions of the players that had it happen to them.
Hey, Steve, this is one that went bad. Kevin Mitchell, who was so strong, but what we used to have in those days seemed like invariably everyone had a birthday, every day of the week or so, it seems, through the course of the summer. And there was a birthday cake that would sit always in the middle of the clubhouse. And Kevin Mitchell went over to our our batting practice pitcher, Tony Farrar, the late Tony Farrar, a good friend of mine, and said, Tony, I don't know about this birthday cake. Help me out. It doesn't smell sour, because I'm going to throw it out. And poor Tony fell for the joke, put his nose next to the cake, and Mitch, who's so strong, pushed his face into the cake, but he broke his nose.
No.
Against the table.
Then there's the one in Chicago. There's a certain statue on the way to the ballpark of a military general and his horse. And the rookies are told that it is traditional for every time that a team comes to Chicago that they go and paint a certain part of the anatomy of the horse in red. So that happens. And then the next day, the clubhouse door is knocked upon loudly by several people dressed as police officers who have come to arrest the rookie, and that's the prank.
And that horse was a male, Steve. I just want you to know that.
Thank you for furthering that, Keith. I put that together. Hey, listen, to get back to Alonzo's initial question, though, he asked, will the hot foot ever make a comeback? Who knows about that? But Keith, Ron, who was the main culprit? Who were the main victims of the hot foot in your playing days?
Well, I don't know the victim, and there was no one that didn't get. I didn't have it happen to me. Yeah. They tried to have it happen to me once. That's right. It was usually Roger, right, Ronnie?
Yeah, Roger did it. I never had it happen to me, but the reason it seemed to work on our club is probably the proudest, most elegant man we had on that club was our first base coach, Bill Robinson. And they used to do it to him over and over again. And he was such a good sport about it, but you knew it broke him inside because he wanted everything to be kind of perfectly right. And at some point during a game, he'd be on fire.
So Eric just followed up on this thread here and wanted to know if there are announcer gags. And I would have been the one that was open to it, right? 7 years ago. You guys were pretty good to me. I don't know. I never had to deal with any of that. Did you have to deal with any of that, Gare?
No, it's we're not as creative as the ball players. We're kind of boring. They've got a lot more free time on their hands, and that's how these things tend to evolve.
We got serious business to do. We can't be screwing around up there in the booth. We got a broadcast to do.
No doubt about that. And to that end, let's talk about some serious business, a very famous game. And by the way, since we did now prove that we can get to your questions early, please keep sending them in because we will get to a couple more afterwards. But yesterday was the 50-year anniversary of that amazing Tom Seaver 19 strikeout performance against the San Diego Padres, April 22nd, 1970. Ron, you did something very recently for SNY.TV talking about some of your favorite Seaver stories.
Yes.
What of those that you have talked about, what is the top one for you? What's your favorite?
Well, I think anyone who came through the Mets, and if Tom was in uniform, at some point you wanted to be his friend, or he wanted him to befriend you. He just held such a regal perch as far as being the Mets, and he's the franchise. But he was awfully nice to me. And when I think about that game, the 19 is never the number for me. It's the 10. The ability to strike out the last 10 hitters. And I know Gary's told me stories about the game that I would not known of, afternoon game, some shadows there at the end, maybe a Padres team that wasn't a championship club, but still, the strikeout 10 batters at the end. We've seen DeGrom, what did he get, 8 to start a game? To strike out the last 10 hitters of a game, to me, is just, I don't even know how you do that.
Yeah, Gary, what are your specific thoughts from that game in particular?
Well, I never actually saw that game. It was, as everybody knows, that day, April 22nd, 1970, was not only the day Tom Seaver struck out the last 10 batters, it was also the first Earth Day. And that was the focus in my school. And we were doing a lot of teach-ins and things like that within our day. So it was I don't know if everybody remembers this, but it used to be that the Mets never played a home night game before May 1st. So this was a Wednesday, and they're playing an afternoon game at 2:00 in the afternoon. And you look at the attendance, I think it was 14,000 something. And I think the only reason it was that high was because it was Earth Day, and a lot of people had the day off from whatever they were doing. So I got to hear about it. I was in the car. I heard about it on the news later, and I got to watch some highlights. But the thing that impresses me, and Ronnie hit it on the head, it's the 10 in a row that is the big deal. And think about this. We are in the most strikeout prone era in history. Month after month after month over the last 10 years, we set new records for most strikeouts. And yet, 50 years later, nobody has equaled that feat. It's almost, when you think about it, and I wrote about this for SNY.TV, I think it's going to post tomorrow. It's almost Ruthian in its anachronism, right? It's an accomplishment from an era that did not feature nearly as many strikeouts, and yet that strikeout record is held up when every other one has fallen over the last 50 years.
Keith, do you know by heart your career numbers against Tom Seaver?
They're not good.
They are not good.
I'm on the
They are not good. You're not alone in that, though. 46 at-bats, hit 196 against Seaver.
That's not bad. That's not bad.
He got no hit by Seaver.
What
right?
I tried.
No hit by
Seaver threw his only no-hitter against us in Cincinnati.
So the question for you, though, is from a batter's perspective, what was it that made him so good, that set him apart above so many really good to great pitchers?
There's a lot of guys with great electric stuff, but between the ears, that separates, the great from the average. Tom knew how to pitch. Tom told me he used to watch the opposing team every start. He'd watch the opposing team take batting practice and look for who was swinging the bat good and who wasn't. You can tell by expressions if a guy was in a slump or really struggling. He's the only pitcher who's ever told me that. I thought that was very informative. As far as his stuff, he just got down so low. and he came over the top, and his fastball, he knew how to pitch up and in, and he had a great breaking ball. He had one of those breaking balls that it was like a comet. I always said, and Gary, Ronald, they throw it so hard, and it's just very few, like, and maybe not on one hand, where the ball like was like triple exposure when the ball broke, as it broke in front of me. That's a great breaking ball. And he had a good changeup, which he very seldom used. Only used it when he was behind the count, 2-0, 3-1, whatever, and he can do that. And he just was overpowering, literally overpowering.
Obviously I never got to see Tom Seaver pitch, but I think I did this on a broadcast early on when I was with you guys, when we did something about our favorite piece of memorabilia. And my favorite piece of memorabilia that I own is a baseball from when I was maybe 1 or 2 years old, signed by Tom Seaver, that says "To Little Steven" on it, because my grandfather was his dry cleaner in Connecticut. And my grandfather used to always tell the story about how he was trying to convince his friends that he knew Tom Seaver, and they didn't believe him. So Seaver told him to come out to a game and come down during batting practice when he would be running around the field, and he would stop and say hello. And so my grandfather brought at least one friend, might have been a couple of friends, and he's, bragging, I know Seaver, he's going to stop for us. And Seaver's running on the warning track with Gary Gentry, I believe. My grandfather, hey, Tom. And Tom looks up at him and just shakes his head like he has no idea who he is and keeps running. And then comes back a second time, does the same thing. And eventually he came back around and was just messing with him. But that is my little Tom Seaver story.
I got one quick one, real quick, and Gary and Ronnie have heard it. 77, Seaver's throwing a 3 in the process of winning a game. They didn't give up 4 hits. And he was a hot August night in Busch Stadium, and he was throwing bullets. And I came out swinging the bat good, and I had good at bats. And after the second at bat, I just said, I was in the dugout sitting down. I said, "Gosh darn, is he throwing hard?" And Lou's sitting like 3 players down from me, and very understated, typical Lou. He said, "You should have seen him in '69."
Lou Brock.
I know we need the Lou Brock animation.
Ding, ding, ding.
Hey, Gary, Rocky wanted to know, since we're talking about Tom Seaver and one of your favorites, I would imagine, growing up, who were your favorite Mets as a kid?
Well, Bud Harrelson was my guy. He was the undersized, overachieving, little ball guy, great fundamentals, great fielder, just the kind of player who, if you were not, a great athlete or a behemoth, who you really identified with. And Buddy was always my guy growing up.
What about you two? I mean, I know it wasn't the Mets growing up, but who were the players that you looked up to? Ron, who was your guy?
Well, two. I was a Red Sox fan growing up in Massachusetts. So Yastrzemski in '67 had an amazing year, Triple Crown, amazing September. We used to listen out while playing wiffle ball out in the yard, and my mom would stop us for every at bat that Yaz used to come up on the transistor radio. But for me and anyone that is my age that grew up around Worcester, Massachusetts, hockey was really burgeoning there. Bobby Orr. Everyone wanted to be Bobby Orr. We used to go in the backyard and pretend like we were Barclay Plager, tripping him up on that goal that he scored against the Blues to win the 1970 Stanley Cup for the Bruins. So Bobby Orr was so big for us.
Ron, I think the NHL Network has something tonight or tomorrow coming up about the 1970 Bruins.
Wow,
so,
great.
yeah. So look, that I think Howie Rose was the one who tweeted about it. He's been on fire since he got a Twitter account.
How about that development since we last spoke? Howie going on Twitter, which I never thought would happen in a million years. And he's been a raging success from day one. I think it's phenomenal.
Who's next?
I have one thing to say to that. Who's going to be Wayne's partner when we get back?
Keith, who was your guy growing up?
Oh, Mickey Mantle, beyond a shadow of a doubt. Got my first card, baseball card, and flipped over the backside and looked, and I was born on his birthday, and that sold me. Mickey Mantle, the sun rose and set with Mickey Mantle.
Okay, fan question time.
Okay.
We've been good. Keep them coming, but we actually saved one from, I think it was 2 weeks ago, KP. So if you're still watching, thank you for watching, and I'm glad that you hung with us. He wants to know from Keith and Ron the moment that you both knew that you had a shot of making the major league. So not that you were going to be a major leaguer to stay, but the moment where it sunk in that, hey, that's a realistic possibility.
Well, I'll go first. I'm so happy that Kevin Plawecki is still keeping in touch. That's very nice of him. It didn't happen to me until I was in college. And I spent one summer in 1980 in the Cape Cod League, and I had been told that all of the great collegiate players played in this league. I had a very difficult time getting into the league. George Greer, who coached hitting for the Mets, was the manager. And he finally said, until the University of Minnesota kids come back from the World Series, you got a spot on the roster. So for a couple of weeks, and had the best summer I've ever had playing baseball, ever had. Didn't pitch an inning, played every day. That was my last time that I was an everyday player. And Cape Cod summer baseball doesn't get any better than that. And the two biggest awards there, greatest pro prospect and the MVP, I won both of those with all the great collegiate players. So I figured if they're the best, I have a shot.
For me, it was 1974 in Tulsa, where I realized I had a shot to be a big leaguer. When I led the league in hitting, the American Association, I hit 353, I think. And when you hit 353, you're not having too many headaches. You're not in a bad mood too often. You know, you come to the park and you're having fun. Everything just fell into place for me, and it just was so easy. And the fact that back in that day, there was a lot of ex-major leaguers that I was facing that were trying to get back in. There was a lot of 30-year-olds and 31-year-olds that had played in the big leagues. My teammates were Hal Lanier, Bobby Heiss of the Giants, Jim Beecham, Dan McGinn. And that's what the league was about. A lot of those, I faced Joe Horland, the old White Sox ace, who was trying to get back in the big leagues. He had the best curveball I ever faced. And I understood now why he won 20 games for the White Sox. So to face those major leaguers, and a lot of them were just guys that went up and didn't make it and were trying to get back, but still, I wore it out, and it was just so easy. It was the most fun year I ever had hitting, and I finally got the confidence, and I said, you know what, I got a shot here.
Gary, did you ever have that moment where you at least knew? No, seriously, you know, it's different, certainly, because it's not just about, you know, and I guess, you know, it's not just about, are you good enough to with baseball? You have to be in the right situation. But as a broadcaster, you can be good enough and you can be blocked, or you can not have the right person hear you. It's such a subjective business. Did you have a moment, A, where you thought, I am good enough to get one of these major league jobs, and B, when you recognize that you would be there, that you would lock it in?
Yeah, it's you know, it's so different as a broadcaster because there are no statistics. There's nobody really to give you feedback. Usually, whatever town you're in, you're the only person doing the thing that you're doing. You know, in the pre-internet days, you didn't get to listen to other people, so you really couldn't compare yourself. So I had no idea. I mean, that's basically the bottom line. And my last year in the minor leagues in 1988 in Pawtucket, I remember thinking to myself midway through the season, you know what? If this doesn't work out, I'm going to go do something else. Because I had, you know, it was one of those things where until I got my first job offer, which happened that winter, and I was fortunate enough to get offered by 3 different major league teams in short order. But until that first offer came in, I had no inkling that I would ever get an opportunity. So it's a much more subjective business, right? There's no hitting 353. There's no, getting an MVP in the Cape Cod League. You're out there, you're sending out tapes, you're hoping that somebody hears something that they like, and ultimately that one person's willing to pull the trigger and give you a chance.
And I think that person, we can safely now say, was correct. Gary Cohen, Keith Hernandez, Ron Darling. This has been another edition of Beyond the Booth Live.
Wait a second.
Look at the time. Look at the time. You want more?
Keep going.
Okay, ready? Yeah. See, look at that. This is for the fans. And look at what Gary just did. We were about to end it, and now we're still going for you. So here we go.
Man, why you cutting it off at the knees?
I take instructions from people way above my pay grade.
Okay? Did you guys ask Keith?
I've been looking. Keith's ready to go. Hey,
I'm fine.
All right. So Gary, this is the follow-up. Then people, when you started talking about your broadcast career, I think this is a natural follow-up. We all know that you grew up idolizing Murph. So multiple people are asking what that was like to eventually work with him, work with the guy that you idolized.
I mean, I did one game with Murph that year in 1988, just filling in just a one-shot deal, and Murph made me feel so incredibly comfortable. But I have to say that in the 15 years that we worked together, there was not a day that went by that I did not at some point think to myself, this is unbelievable. I am sitting next to Bob Murphy, who I used to listen to under my pillow when I was 6 years old, and I am sharing a broadcast booth with him broadcasting the Mets. I mean, it was just, the whole notion of it was so beyond what I ever could have thought. These guys had their heroes and maybe got to play with them at the beginning of their career, the end of the players they looked up to's career. It's different with broadcasters who stay around a lot longer. And the fact that I got to work with Murph for 15 years was pretty phenomenal.
Wow.
You guys have become, and I know it's difficult for you to think this way in the moment, but certainly as iconic as that trio was, the three of you are an iconic Mets broadcasting trio now. And I know that it wasn't that way from day one necessarily, and these things happen gradually over time, but was there a moment, a season, a series, anything where any one of you thought to yourself, you know what? This can be pretty special here. What we've got going, that unspoken, intangible chemistry is here, and this could be something really special. Was there that moment for any of you?
Who wants to go first?
You, Keith. Go ahead, Keith.
Oh, well, I always liked the notion that we had two analysts, one a pitcher and one a hitter. I thought that really enhanced the broadcast and get more information out to the fans who are watching, qualified information. And then, I'd never worked with Gary, and then I realized right away in that first season that I better pay attention, because Gary's he's in the game, he's going to engage, he always engages us, and with sometimes pointed questions, and I think it adds to the broadcast. So Kurt Gowdy picked this trio, and it didn't take long for it to click, and I just think it was just the right personalities. And like I've always said, Gary's the maestro. He's the play-by-play guy. He brings us in, and I don't think you're going to find a finer play-by-play guy than Gary.
Well, I totally agree with what Keith just said. I was thinking about Gary saying it was 15 years with Murph. If this ever gets off the ground this year, Gary, it'll be our 15th year together, which is crazy. I don't think any of us ever think 1 second that we got something special or we are special. I think what it all came down from, and Gary's described it better than I have in the past, and that is there's no ego in the booth. Keith, when hitting is going, Keith has it. When pitching is going, I've got it. Gary steers it through some great and murky waters at times. So it's there's just no ego in the booth as far as who's going to say more or who's going to talk more. It's always about who is supposed to talk, will talk in our booth, and that makes it so much fun.
I think you asked when we knew. I don't think we've ever known, but I think people around us really helped us get to where we are. I remember early on, our director, the late Bill Webb, coming to me and talking about certain things that he thought were really working and some things that could get better. And you know, he's a guy who had seen everybody and worked with everybody in the business, but I think he had a very positive feeling about the way it worked. And the other, you know, the other person who has been so instrumental and does not get nearly enough public credit is our producer, Greg Picker, who is as creative and insightful and knowledgeable about baseball and television as anybody could possibly be. And I know he's made all three of us much better and gets a lot of the credit. But, you know, I think what Ronnie said is really important about low egos, because if you listen to people talk about three-man booths in general, most people are not fans of three-man booths because there tend to be competitions for the microphone, less of a low ego situation where people want to be the star. And I think that's really where we have benefited. And I think it's a remarkable thing when you have, you know, a guy who should be in the Hall of Fame in Keith, one of the greatest pitchers in Mets history in Ronnie, that is not ever a problem. And I give credit to these guys, but also to the guys behind the scenes who have really instilled in us, if we needed any cajoling in that direction, that it is all about a team effort. I know from my standpoint, having never worked in television before we came to this, you know, in radio, you're in control of the entire production. Your voice is all there is. Whereas in television, it is a team sport. You have dozens and dozens of people with camera operators and tape operators and audio people and video people. And it's an enormous crew, and there's only so much you can control. And I think that's the biggest lesson I had to learn early on. And I think these guys have figured that out along the way too. If you do your job to the best of your ability, it contributes to a team effort. And I think that's where, if we have succeeded, that's really where it comes from.
Steve, one more point about Greg Picker. He's in that truck every game. He's been with us from the beginning. And there's been some bad Met seasons. And you're talking August, the dog days, and it's some stinker games. And Greg Picker is listening to our every word. There's times I'm in the middle of a sentence and I can't, sometimes we just forget the right word. And Greg is like, he's like Karnak. He just sits there and he'll say, okay, if the word is hustle. And I don't skip a beat with my sentence. He's like, he knows that I hesitated. And he always engages us. He's in our ear, folks. We have those, and we can hear Greg in the truck. And if we make a point, an analytical point, Greg will say, expound, that's not enough. What do you mean? More. And if we also are on a particular point and he thinks that we've kind of gone too long on it, he'll just say, okay, let's move on. So the producer has that kind of control within the broadcast. And Greg is like, every game is like you're in a stretch run in September fighting. Every game's important.
And, you know, finally, Steve, I love the way on Greg too, is not only is he one of the most talented people, I mean, he could be, I don't know, he could be producing films, not us knuckleheads, 162 times a year. But he does it, and he's done it becoming our friend too. You know, when we're away from the ballpark, he's become a friend to Gary, Keith, and I. And we spend, I mean, as much time on the road, we spend it with Greg talking about the game or talking about other stuff. He's just a delight to be around.
Well, to Keith's point, it's it's what fans can't see, but it's really a 4-person conversation where the fans can't hear one of those people. And that's what the best producers really are the people that are just conversing the entire time and making sure everything stays on track. So listen, I am getting the hook. Okay. But Gary,
Don't take
Mr.
it personal.
Maestro, are we allowed to call it there?
You know what? It's your show, Steve. If you need to go, I understand.
Hey, if there's one thing I've learned, it's never really my show. You know that. All right, guys. This was great. Again, we will be back every Thursday, 4:00. Join us. Get your questions in. We will answer as much as possible. For Gary, Keith, Ron, I'm Steve. Have a great week, everybody.